Welcome to Church and State with Dave Pellowe. Very excited to be joined by Senator Cory Bernardi today. Thank you for squeezing me into your absolutely hectic schedule.
It's my pleasure, Dave. I'm excited to be here with you too, so it's a real pleasure.
So the first thing I want to explore with you is your understanding of what a conservative is. And as a bit of context for how to answer this, we hear lots of people using different labels these days to describe different things. Malcolm Turnbull is a conservative, he's a liberal, he's a progressive, he's a centrist, he's a Republican, he's an Elizabethan. What exactly is a conservative? And for the average person in Australia, whether they're a trade unionist, libertarian, a classical liberal or a traditional conservative, what exactly would they be thinking and feeling and believing and wanting government to do for them if they were your kind of conservative?
Well, see, I think you touched upon it. What are they thinking and feeling, and what's their outlook and disposition? Because that's what conservatism is. It's not doctrinaire. It doesn't say you have to tick this box and that box and the other box in order to be accepted as a conservative or define yourself as conservative. Conservatives generally think that there is a lived experience. It's travelled through generations of ancestors that has delivered us results today, and we're wise to learn from that, because by conserving the best elements of our past, we're going to conserve and protect the best elements of our future. We think that change is, of course, inevitable, but it should be prudent, it should be progress, it shouldn't be experimental, and we want to build upon or see further because of the people that have come before us.
Okay, so why would a libertarian, someone who describes themselves as a libertarian, vote for Australian Conservatives? What about Australian Conservatives would appeal to that group? Well,
libertarians are all about, minimising government interference in their lives. It is about giving themselves the maximum amount of freedom and to live in autonomy and self-determination. There is many aspects of that I agree with. I believe that we should have the maximum amount of freedom that is consistent with a civil society. I recognise there is a role for government, and exactly what role that should play may differ between one brand or one branch of conservatism versus, say, the libertarian movement. But if you do want the maximum autonomy and self-determination in your life, then you have to have some constraints around how our society is built and how it evolves. I happen to think the pillars upon which our society is built is about families. I think it is about free enterprise. I think it is about faith. And I think it's about making sure that we have the maximum amount of freedom. If you can uphold those four pillars, you will have civil society, you will have responsible adults, you'll have good ethics in our children, and that ethic of reciprocity, I guess, working again within the whole community, which is do unto others as you want them to do unto you. And that's the essential element of, I think, how our society functions.
I've been talking to different people who disagree with me on some things and others who agree with me. One of the people I've spoken to is I guess one of those Aussie battlers who identifies himself as a Labor voter, whose family has always voted Labor, but Labor's moved further to the left and the other major parties have moved further to the left. He was explaining to me how very disappointed and disillusioned he was with the Labor Party. And unfortunately, your Queensland events are all sold out, so this particular friend's missed the boat, but he wanted to come to see what Cory Bernardi would offer a traditional Labor voter.
Well, it's interesting. On my mother's side, they were all traditional Labor voters. My grandfather was a very strong trade unionist, and I think he would, struggle with where the Labor Party is today. There are many conservatives in the Labor Party who believe that civil society, that they believe in faith, they believe in the sanctity of life, they believe that people deserve a fair go, and conservatives are not the enemy of the worker. In fact, quite the opposite. We're the champion of the worker, because we think that people deserve meaningful work, that they deserve to get reward for their efforts, fair labour. But equally, we believe that, I see that the people who provide those jobs are necessary too. There's got to be a balance in that. So it's not about being, anti-union. What's happened has been that the union movement has moved away from its traditional role. The guild or the small trade union sticking up for the interests of workers disappeared a long time ago, because now unions are professional outfits. You're seeing people like Bill Shorten trade away workers' entitlements for some benefit for the union. It's a business, and the business is trading in the currency of people. I'm not interested in that. What I want is for people to go to work, get a fair day's pay, take pride in what they're doing, go home to their families and say, I can provide for you because of the environment that we live in. And if you treat people with that respect as an employer, they will do amazing things for you, and the employer does amazing things for them in return. That's the general rule I've always observed in politics.
So Mark Latham was on the show, and he was expressing some disappointment in the evolution that the Labor Party has taken over his career and observation, because he was talking to Callum Thwaites, who was thoroughly persecuted by the 18C, the Racial Discrimination Act, and he was asking Callum, has anybody from the Labor Party ever called you, any of the Labor politicians called you to say we're with you and this is really unfair? Because he was saying the Labor Party was always somebody who'd stick up for the underdog, for the guy who was not being given a fair go. They were the party of the fair go. So is that something you've seen in the evolution of Australian politics? Is that something you would take the place of, fill the void?
Well, things have changed in politics. And, 10 years ago we had no national debt, and we had a Prime Minister that had been with us for, 11 years. We've since had 6 Prime Ministers in the last 10 years, and the country's up to its neck or over its head in debts, actually. And the politics of the Liberal Party and the Labor Party have changed too. The Labor have fully embraced identity politics. It is compartmentalising people along the basis of race or sexual orientation or gender or skin colour. Or, this culture of rights. And I said this in my maiden speech in the Senate. The culture of rights is forcing us to determine whose rights should prevail. And no longer is it the right for all of us to live and get along together and embrace the culture and the history and the traditions that have built us as the greatest country in the world. It is now the rights of the minority, the rights of the squeaky wheel, those who are desperate for attention.
The victim Olympics.
The victim Olympics, as you might want to call it. And that's been embraced by politicians because they know they can carve off people in that space. And so, Labor won't break away from that mould. And you had the case of Joe Bullock, who was a Labor senator, who left the Senate because, Labor refused to accept that he had a different view on marriage. They wanted to compel him to support changing the marriage laws.
Yeah.
And we're seeing it creep across the political spectrum everywhere. The Liberal Party's fallen into it. That's not the game that we're playing. We're in the business of upholding principle, whether people agree with it or not. We're going to fight the good fight because it's worth doing. And if we don't stand there on principle, then we might as well give everything away.
Now, you've said over and over again that if you're not welcome in Malcolm Turnbull's Liberal Party, you're welcome in Cory Bernardi's Australian Conservatives Party. But like you did for a very long time, there's a lot of Conservatives in Malcolm Turnbull's Liberal Party who want to try and fix it, who want to try and save it, who want to try and preserve it and maybe reform it from the inside. What advice would you give them? How can they go about that the best way?
Save yourself the pain is what I would say. Look, I've got to take you back. Malcolm Turnbull's Liberal team was how it was christened at the election. The Australian Conservatives is not Cory Bernardi's party. It is a party for people who are conservative, who think there has to be a better way. And that is in stark contrast to what we're doing.
I think that's a good move. I think the vanity-named teams have a very short shelf life.
Well, it all becomes about, ego or personality. And I'm not interested in that. The greatest success I could have would be for the party to not be needed anymore because, others had come to their senses. I don't see that happening, or that it will outlast my influence. And I can do that by empowering other people to get them stronger in there and make it a truly conservative force in politics. So, I'm not interested in that. But I spent 30 years in the Liberal Party waging the same battles inside the Parliament and outside the Parliament. I haven't changed. And what dawned on me was this, that when Labor were in power, the battles were about not copying Labor's policy, about the emissions trading scheme or anything else. It became about principle. When the Prime Minister, Abbott, was elected, we still fought those same battles. There were those in our party who wanted to ape Labor policy, and some of the battles were against the Prime Minister and some things which were inconsistent with Liberal philosophy. It's the same thing with the current Prime Minister. It is the sum of the parts. It's no longer the leader, no longer the person that's there. It's the ethos. It has become the party for those who can't handle the Labor Party, so they join the Liberal Party. And I don't think that's a recipe for success. And that's why we've still got massive debts. We're not having the defence of freedom of speech. We're not having, the defence of worker and enterprise. We're getting big government programs. We're getting
massive debts.
The massive debts. As we said, you've got the public service continuing to grow, and no one knows what they stand for anymore. I think, for good or for bad, everyone knows what I stand for. And they've got a pretty good idea of what the Australian Conservatives stand for. We stand for stronger families, fostering free enterprise, limiting size and scope of government, and we want to rebuild civil society. It's a pretty mainstream agenda.
So what about those hardcore Conservatives in the Liberal Party who are saying by other Conservatives exiting the party, you're actually just reducing the resistance to the progressive agenda in the Liberal Party and giving it over to a very progressive party? Yeah,
look, I understand that argument, but it's a self-serving argument because a lot of the times these same people wouldn't be supportive of me. The number of times people would come to me in the Liberal Party and say, you've got to do this. And one case in point was a senior cabinet minister now rang up about some imam that had got out and said some terrible things. And he said, what are we going to do about this? And I said, well, when you say we, you must acknowledge I've been in that space arguing against, this Islamic culture and encroachment into our way of life for years now. You've never said anything about it. So when you say we, I presume you mean you're going to do something. And they then said, oh no, I can't do it because. And I said, because of your career, your glittering career that lies before you. But that's the cowardice that sits there. And there's always an excuse why someone else should do the heavy lifting. I don't think they've got an excuse anymore. And, it is the desire for people to climb ever higher on what I think is the false idol of being high in the government decision-making process that has compromised the entire system. That's part of the reason I think we should need to reform the system, particularly in the Senate, but more importantly, it's why I will not compromise. I don't need higher office in order to make me feel good about myself or what I'm doing. I got into politics to do something, not to be someone. And I'll, win, lose or draw. That's what I'll take to my political grave.
I actually wonder what resistance and comments Robert Menzies got as he was contemplating leaving the United Australia Party and suggesting that it had reached the end of its usefulness. I think there would have been a lot of similar comments as those very, very diehard Conservatives in the Liberal Party are now offering.
Yeah, Dave, I never want to compare myself with anyone, so please don't misunderstand this. But
it was more a comparison about what the other people in the party who are just blindly loyal to flog a dead horse.
Well, at some point, loyalty needs to be recognised as to ideas and to values and principles. It's not to people, it's not to political parties, because, that comes and goes and they change. But I've been loyal to my ideas and principles. But when I said I don't want to compare myself to anyone, I do examine some people through history who dealt with great hardship and adversity, that the people that suffered the slings and arrows of their self-belief and those that prevailed. John F. Kennedy wrote a book, or had a book written for him, I think, called Profiles in Courage. And it's really illuminating reading, because people who have done amazing things and have received no public applaud for it, but have really changed and shaped history in other ways. And I think that's inspiring. More publicly, you have people who took on the battles, like, you know, Reagan was loathed by the Republican Party back in the 80s and the 70s. He made the transition from Democrat, so he would have been loathed by the Democrats as well. You can look at John Howard, whom I have enormous respect for, was, you know, Mr. 17%, I think, at one point in his leader of the opposition days, and went on to be, you know, one of Australia's greatest prime ministers. So, you know, people have been through much worse than I have. They don't affect how I'm approaching my business and my work, because I just know that I'm doing what I think is right. And if you feel good within yourself about what you're doing, you will ultimately make others feel good about following you.
In the next segment, let's talk about your vision for the future of Australia and what we could practically do to make Australia great. Again. Thanks for watching. If you really enjoyed that video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Have a look at this great video next, and check out the website for even more interesting articles and episodes later.